I wanted to open this episode talking about how EO Browser is this great resource that I often use to show people who don't know much about satellite images what they can actually look like, moving away from the predetermined notion that Google Maps might have given them. Or discuss Sentinel Hub, which is this strange yet incredibly valuable resource that a lot of people go to willingly pay for free and open data, mostly because it's so much easier to access at scale there. And then that would have allowed me to present today's guest, which is Grega Milčinski, and talk about the company that he founded around that, which is Sinergise back in 2008. We would have talked about starting the company and the future of those projects. And then the news hit. Planet, who builds and operates the largest constellation of imaging satellites, was going to acquire Sinergise. So now, any conversation about the future of EO Browser and Sentinel Hub would be pretty much irrelevant and unknown. The deal isn't quite closed yet, so Grega cannot really discuss the future of those projects. So we had a few back and forth with Grega discussing, do we want to still have this conversation, and decided that ultimately yes, we did want to talk about it, because EO Browser is still this great resource that I and over 200,000 people a month go to get a quick glance at the latest free and open satellite image. And Sentinel Hub is still this great resource that a lot of people use to get access to those images at scale. There's a lot of questions around this acquisition. We talk at length during this interview about how the European Commission and the European Space Agency have had a pivotal role in helping Sinergise get to where it is, while Planet, the company acquiring them, is an American company. That raises questions around the future of Europe in Earth observation. But, as I said, the deal isn't quite closed yet, so Grega cannot discuss that. However, I'm really grateful that Grega still decided to come on the podcast and talk about the history of Sinergise, how things started. That hasn't changed, but also actually about why he decided to go forth with an acquisition. Before we get started, I'd like to talk about the sponsor of this episode, which today isn't a company, but a person, and that's Stephen Feldman. Stephen is the co-host of the Geomob podcast, where they talk to people doing interesting map-related projects. One of my favorite recent interviews of theirs is with Jeremy Garniot, the creator of Mapstodon, the map-related server for Mastodon. They also talk to startup founders, open data activists, and just interesting people. I've actually been on the Geomob podcast before to talk about my own journey of podcasting. Alongside that, Stephen runs Mapery.org, where he compiles maps in the wild, which are images of different and various maps spotted randomly. One of my favorite has got to be this map of South America that's printed on a French chocolate biscuit that I actually used to eat as a kid. Stephen told me one of his favorite is a hand-drawn map of Ukraine that says Ukraine, not Russia, that was left near the Ukrainian embassy in The Hague, actually not very far from where I live. So I really encourage you to go have a look and just see what they have there. I'll, of course, put links in the show notes. And thank you again to Stephen for sponsoring this episode. Hi, Grega. I'm very excited to have you on. This is a bit of a different take on trying to do these conversations. Okay, there's some big news we're going to have to address. But before that, I want to stick to the way I usually do these because I like how it starts. So I usually ask people how they would describe themselves. So let's go there first. How would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as a physicist who have barely finished the studies. While studying, I joined the company that was forming at the time, and it just kept me too busy. And I was never good enough in engineering, like software development, things like that. So they always delegated this kind of organizational duties to me, which eventually evolved into managerial duties. And so, here I am. Like a few years ago, I was forbidden by the team to do any kind of code any longer. So I can only write emails and write documents and talk. So this is what I do most of the time. Otherwise, I am a paraglider. I like outdoor activities whenever I have time, and I like nature overall.
That sounds great. I like that. There's a bunch of things I want to come back to. I've heard you mention many times that you didn't consider yourself as much as a scientist and more on the engineering side. I want to go there later, but first, let's address the big elephant in the room. So, we have had this call scheduled for quite some time. I reached out to you a little while ago, and we had a pre-interview chat, like I do. And then the next day, the announcement came that Planet, the company that creates and operates probably the largest Earth observation constellation, acquires Sinergise, the company that you started. Yeah, what can we talk about from this? And let's address this first.
Yeah, you're right. They're not. We cannot talk about all the things. Mostly, we cannot talk much about the future because Planet is a publicly traded company, and you have these things called forward-looking statements. And very importantly, what you've seen was the announcement of the deal which we signed, which is still not closed. Right, it will take a while for this to close. So like anything from now until after closing is a bit of an uncertainty. So therefore, it's impossible. Or I mean, I would get into the trouble probably if I talked about things which might not be true eventually, because as mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty. What I I can talk about is all the past, like how we got to this point, excluding obviously the confidential details related to the planet, but this is just a minor part of the story. Um, I can, if interested, share why we joined or why we agreed to a merger. Yeah, but yeah, generally, we can talk about all the relevant parts of how Synergise came to be and what we did in the past and what we are doing right now.
Yeah. So, first of all, I appreciate you coming on and still having this conversation, because I can imagine it's quite tricky to balance everything. I'm sure there's a lot going on. So, yeah, thanks for saying that. And I think it's important to state that as well. When I reached out, I wanted to know a lot more about Synergise and the company Sentinel Hub. We're going to talk about EO Browser. I think it's best if we start explaining those projects, and then I do want to get to why, if you want to talk about that. But before we get there, let's start from the beginning. You started Synergise, which is this company that has done a lot of these projects. Can we start from the beginning? You said you're a physicist that didn't finish his study or barely finished his studies. So let's go all the way back there. How did things get started for you?
So that was a long while ago. That was 2000, I think. So I was in second year of studies of physics. And I was looking for a summer job, and there was a university, the research institute across the road called Josef Stefan Institute, and there was a team working on control systems for particle accelerators. And I joined that team because it looked like a fun team. And then that team was growing, and as it often happens, the research institutes don't have a right modus operandi for things to really go into production, right? So, like long-term employments, and all the things that you need if you want to deliver something that really works. So, what happened is that the institute proposed that we do a spin-off, and our boss at the time, he still is called Mark Pliszko. He decided to jump into it. So, and he decided to also invite 10 or 11 of the closest confidants to this gig. And we co-founded a company called CozyLab, or Control System Laboratory. And yeah, our focus was particle accelerators, so nothing to do with geospatial. That said, it had a lot to do with the web, because we were the team that was the first one using web technologies for actual this kind of large physics experiments. And then, so this was in 2001, and at the time, they, because every company does need the CEO and the boss. He didn't want to have his hands dirty, right, with all this managerial work. He was, I mean, he still is a proper scientist. He wants to do cool stuff, not this boring administrative stuff. And he was like kind of, yeah, so bless you. Who should be, the CEO? And then two of us raised our hands, and then I had an advantage because at the time, when I was young, I was the Boy Scout, and in the Boy Scouts, I had also the duty of the cashier. So I knew all about finances, right? Because you need to do finances in the Boy Scouts as well, and that gave me all the experience needed to be a CEO at the time. I mean, literally, this is how it happened, right? And then anyway, so we were a company. Then in like a year later, the one Java developer joined the team. He's called Dragan, and he was previously working on geospatial data. And so he went, but again, he went and did the particle accelerator stuff. And then he went for a summer break. And you know how the engineers are, that breaks are typically more frustrating than not. And he used the time for a summer break to actually develop a first prototype of our geospatial web-based management system. So basically connecting the GIS technologies with the web technologies. We call this Giselle. I think it was one of the first products, at least that we knew of, that used like really typical web technologies to do the geospatial data editing over the web, like with lots of users. That was in 2003, and this is what we count as a start of our team. And then we had this prototype, and then it was kind of, oh, now we need to sell this. And we went to the Ministry of Agriculture here in Slovenia, and we said to them, look, we have this thing. And they just needed something similar for the land parcel identification system that was starting at the time. That was prior Slovenia being part of European Union. They gave us the opportunity, lots of trust, and then fast forward, in 2008, there were about 15 of us that were working in the geospatial team, and about 30 that were working on particle accelerators. And we realized that it's much different work. Like you have like science on one side, engineering on the other side, different type of sales, everything different. And we decided to basically do another spin-off. So spin-off from CozyLab this time. And we created a company called Sinergise. That was in 2008. And here we are.
So first of all, that's pretty crazy that there's like physics, particle acceleration on the one hand, and geospatial on the other. Like those two don't usually get mentioned together. Is that why you spin off Sinergise into its own thing, as realizing that those two things are different? You mentioned science and engineering being different, and we'll come back to that. But is it also because just the domain it was applied to is so different?
I mean, just about everything was different. Marketing was different. The customers were different. On one side, you were selling basically just the consultancy services and helping the scientists to set up the systems, developing systems as well. But again, they were all open source activities. And on the other side, you had like a commercial product with geospatial. You had customers who didn't want to develop this product; they just wanted to use it. Whereas scientists, they always wanted also to be involved in the development, right? Because they are scientists. So yeah, I mean, just about everything was different. So we needed to hire different type of people. On one side, you had more people who understood physics and did the software development. Here, it was primarily software development, and domain knowledge was just the secondary thing, right? So yeah, there were a lot of things that were different, and we just decided that it's easiest that we split. And we are still friends, and we still work together. I mean, for a long time, we had joint administration, like back office, for 5 years or so. Then we matured enough that we have our own. And yeah, we work on some occasions together, but generally, because it's so different field, that yeah, the opportunities are not too many.
Right. So then all of a sudden you're at the head of this company that's kind of, it seems pretty randomly, ends up working on geospatial stuff in 2008. It seems like you already have projects with the Agricultural Ministry of Slovenia at that point. How do things move on from there? Because then it seems like Sinergise does a lot of things today. So can you walk me through how we go from 2008 with this project to kind of condense 15 years of work?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we had at the time was this pretty unique web-based technology. I mean, it was
Right.
like, I think that we were at the time, again, at the forefront of a very, very small niche or narrow niche, right? Because there were very few fields that needed this kind of large geospatial systems. Agriculture in Europe were one of them because you have subsidies and there is a ton of money flowing, and therefore there is also some value in proper geospatial data. The other one is property management, like real estate, things like that, where you have property taxes and overall value. And then, I mean, then you have basically from there on, it gets into the defense. We never entered the defense field. We were not keen to go there. Neither we had like any connections or whatever. So, but we had this really cool technology. I mean, just to give you an idea about like specifics, we were using at the time Oracle database because that was the thing, and Oracle database was not performant enough for the load of the system, so we had to rebuild the indexes of the Oracle database to actually to make it work. Then there were no, object storage yet at the time. So basically, we created our own object storage kind of thing by using the hard disk of the operators of the system. So you had like, I don't know, 50 operators, and each had their own PC. And we distributed the raster data to these 50 PCs that from the operators, and then we somehow shared them between all of them, right? So that you had it was exactly the same concept, just done in a bit like not in a cloud way, but rather in a PC way. So yeah, we had this thing, and we had already project with Slovenia Ministry of Agriculture. Then we had projects with Croatia, which is a neighboring country. And then we went further down the former Yugoslavia way, like Macedonia and Montenegro. And because they were all following the similar approach, we were able to get some interesting projects with Airbus. One was in Mauritius. This was related to the land administration. So in Mauritius, we built and we still operate like the full land administration system for the island. And there, another cool story is that when we built it, we kind of got the best possible feedback from the customer. They said, this year is the first year that at the Christmas break we can actually go home and have Christmas break, because we had all the work done, because they always had to finish the work until end of the year, and they always spend this last 2 weeks of the year just doing all the fuss. And with the like proper system, they were able to do it on time. So basically, we evolved, and we were focusing to the large governmental scale systems, because this is where our system was better than Esri, or QGIS, because you had like really large scale controlled environment where things really need to fit together, like topology editing, all the complexities of the geospatial domain. And then we had a project in Ghana, where again we were setting up the land administration system. That was in 2015. And what it happens with these projects often is that, it's a World Bank funded project, and it always starts with consultants. They first specify the data room. That's the most important part, the data room. So they build the data room, then they set up the servers in that data room. And then they start thinking, and then they say, now we need the data. They acquire the data. Then they start thinking about the software to actually make use of the data, right? And it takes a while for the software to be built. And when the software was built, the data were outdated already. And Ghana is a developing country, so things do change a lot. And we were kind of, okay, so how can we help them? And at the time, so maybe one important point, up to that point, we didn't work with satellite data at all, right? We were very good at the vector data, so like points, lines, polygons, and so on. We were very good at distributing raster data, aerial imagery, including some satellite imagery, but it was like always just static raster layers, but never had any idea about the remote sensing. And then we were listening about this. Oh yeah, so Sentinel satellites, they are coming. They will have like every 5 days the full year updated. And it sounded like, wow, that is exactly what Ghana needs, because the data is changing. We didn't yet grasp on how useful the resolution will be. I mean, we just said, look, there we can get the data to them. And then we started to look into the simulated data and how and like the technology to work with this data. So suddenly, instead of a like static layer, you have all these bands, and you have the data that is changing every 5 days or whatever. And we looked at the technology, and we realized that the technology that is there is not really doesn't scale well, because we would need, I think about few tens of servers just running to just process the Ghana data to basically make it available in an old-fashioned way. And then, then we had an idea, like, can we do this differently? I mean, one thing that probably separated us from a general like the geospatial domain is that we had lots of programmers that were really good at what they were working on, and we had projects that really had to work. Like it was not 24/7 thing, because they were not live critical, but if the land property system doesn't work, people can sell their real estate, which is bad. So we had a lot of this knowledge, and we said, there was someone who said, look, let's try to do this differently. We believe we can do it better, right? I mean, it happens often, again, in the IT environment, that you have people who think that they can do better, and we gave it a try. Then what happened? We made a prototype that was based on our Geopedia system, which is another cool stuff that we had that probably a very few other people had. So Geopedia is a cloud GIS, something you would now. CartoDB is probably closest to that. But again, that was 2007. We started with Geopedia, so way before everyone else. But because we were a bootstrapped small company, we never went global, right? Because we didn't have the resources to buy maps and so on. So it was always just a technology. So we used this technology, Geopedia, and we made a prototype. And we realized that it's all cool, but if you want this to really work on a global scale, you need to have fast access to the data. And then we went to European Space Agency for a meeting, and we said, look, we would like we'd like you to fund us to create our own hardware for that. Give us 100K and we'll create our own cloud. And at ESA, ESA many times proved to be really, let's say, beneficial partner. They said, look, building infrastructure, that's passé, right? That's yesterday. We don't want to invest in you buying hardware. Try to think of what you can do with the software. And then there was another nice coincidence that I went to the conference, and I listened to Jet Sandwell promoting how they put Landsat on AWS. And then after the meeting, I went to him more just to make a conversation, because we didn't work with AWS at all at the time. And I said, what about Sentinel? You have Landsat, what about Sentinel? And he said, yeah, we are looking for a partner to do that, and it should be a European company because of politics, And I said, look, we are a European company. We can do that. And he was like, who are you? Because we were nowhere, right? We were completely unknown in the field. But AWS was so cool at the time, and Jet probably deserves all the benefit of that. They basically trusted us, and we got an account that now costs, I think, 300K a month just for storage. Amazon is paying for that, right? So, but we own it and operate it. So basically, they trusted us this operation. We put the data to AWS, made it available for everyone, right? This is a typical AWS open data policy, but also made it available to Sentinel Hub. We made this prototype that was using the cloud technology. We made, so we first made the application called Postcards from Space, which was a map where you went to a place and said, look, give me a true color image from, I don't know, 2 days ago. And we gave you 500 by 500 pixel image postcard, right? And the reason why we had this is that it took about 10 seconds to generate this image. And this was okay for this kind of application, but definitely not okay for any kind of interactive use. It was like due to the limitations of our technology. But then we pushed on and we created Sentinel Playground, which was, I think, the first web application which provided insight into the full archive of Sentinel data. And this is, and basically what you see now with your browser, it's more or less the same technology, just, evolved obviously from there on. And this is where suddenly we became something in this field, because suddenly people noticed and said, wow, is this possible, right? And like you would expect something like this from Google, because they had Google Maps and they had the Landsat in Google Maps in this way, or in the Google Earth Engine in this way, but not from a small company from Europe which nobody knew of, right? And which with no venture capital, we didn't have millions in budget for the cloud. We really had to be very conservative in terms of using the resources, which also pushed us to do the software really well. And yeah, maybe another fun fact: when we created this Sentinel Hub, I wanted to test it, right? And it has this capability to combine bands, and it was like, okay, so we don't want true color, we want false color, and I was like, how actually you build false color image? Because at the time, as mentioned, nobody was good enough at satellite imagery to know what the false color is, what NDVI is. Nobody knew that, right? So I had to Google in the company. Yeah, in the company, nobody was able to like know this like from the top of their head. So I had to Google how to combine bands to actually get the relevant false color. But anyway, so then there was Sentinel Playground, and people start noticing and using the data, and then it evolved from there on.
If I understand correctly, it starts with you have this project in Ghana, like you actually have a real project that's ongoing with a problem to solve. And then in the back, you hear, oh, there's this Sentinel data that's coming up, this European project of this open and free data that comes up. And you're like, oh, this is great. This seems like it's going to solve our problem. You try to use it and you're like, we can't use this out of the box. And so that sounds like a cool project to take on as well. And now it seems like that's most of what Sinergise does, or at least it's what Sinergise is most known for. I don't know in terms of the actual revenue and work, like, because you guys still do a lot of those agricultural projects as well. And then Sentinel Hub kind of feels like it's a side project nearly.
It started like a side project indeed. And importantly, before Sentinel Hub, we had this technology, Giselle, that was kind of a framework, a product, but it was not a product in a way that you just sell it. It was always large, turnkey solutions, 1 million euros budget, right? So we had a few of these every year, and this is what we were working on. And Sentinel Hub was the first thing when I said, look, this actually is a product which we can sell out of the box. Like, just there it is, people can come and buy it. And it started slow. We used a lot. We benefited a lot from the Horizon Europe project, or Horizon 2020 project, because we had resources. We were able to put the best resources to this project, right? Because we had funding from Horizon Europe.
Yeah. So just to interrupt you, there's Horizon 2020 is I think a program from the European Commission. I always confuse them to help spin some European startups and fund them in projects.
Horizon 2020 was a research and development grant project, which basically supported the research. It just after 2020, it renamed to Horizon Europe, because 2020 is now past, no longer the future. But it's the same principle, and basically they fund, from 60 to 100%, depending on the what kind of a project it is, of the research activities. And they basically, it's not like that is a customer ordering what to do, but rather you propose to them what you'd like to do, and they will fund you if it's I mean, it's the best way of getting funding because you don't give any equity away, right?
Yeah.
And you don't get any venture capitalists that would hit you on the head. It's just, they are very kind. So again, a very, very useful resource. ESA has similar projects as well, and we used ESA in this way. And so Sentinel Hub slowly grew. It grew, and we created like a product that really, really worked. And we had users, like it took a while, years, for the users to start paying in the decent amounts that this was somehow sustainable. And then we realized that, okay, now we know how to process the data. What now, right? I mean, that's we can only push this that far, right? Because it's a solved problem in our eyes, at least. And then we realized that there is so much of data that if we want to really make it useful, you need to include some machine learning into it. And we didn't have any experience. We had one physicist who was a colleague of mine in the studies as well, but he was a PhD. He is a PhD, so he much better in physics than me. Who knew this? And then we brought some additional folks on, and we said, look, try to do something useful with machine learning and satellite data. That was the premise. And the first thing that they did was S2 cloudless, so the cloud detection, simply because it was a problem that was there and it was kind of manageable. They were able to address it with, again, limited resources. And
so that is, again, just to interrupt, that is creating an algorithm that finds and masks clouds in optical images, because clouds are really annoying, and you don't want your classification to classify a cloud as a house. You just want to ignore it. So it's a very common problem in optical imagery, and that's the first thing that you guys decided to tackle, right?
Indeed, and it's a problem that was addressed many times in the past already. We're not the first one doing it.
Yeah.
But again, as it happens in the company, we believe that we can do it better.
I think it's a joke that if you spend any time in remote sensing, first you think that cloud removal is solved, and then you realize it's actually not.
Indeed, yeah. So so we created our own, obviously much better algorithm than anyone else, of course. And so this was that, and then we were looking on, and then what we realized is that the agriculture projects that we had and we still have, this related to the management of agriculture activities, mostly related to Common Agriculture Policy Program in Europe. Again, for the reference for everyone, Europe distributes about, I think, 35% of their budget to the farmers in return to ensure some kind of sustainability of the farming, to ensure that the farmers are there, right, so that they use they use the land in an appropriate way. And this comes to tens of billions of euros every year. And this does require some governance, right? Because you can't just distribute tens of billions of over like random. And there was a lot of abuse. I mean, a lot in the past, from, I know, farmers registering their fields, which eventually were shown to be in the sea, and so on, right? So a ton. We could have a session on this only. So we were working on that. And we realized that the Sentinel data are really good for monitoring of vegetation with the resolution, with the revisit time, and that agriculture is also very much related to vegetation. And in the Common Agriculture Policy, you had this concept of checks, like annual checks, which were typically done using on-the-spot checks. So they went and checked a few % of the fields every year. Then they started to use some satellite imagery just as a backdrop to do some part of it in the office. So like just looking at the data. And we realized that Sentinel can really greatly benefit with this process because you have this ongoing global, let's say countrywide, wall-to-wall data set. And we started to, I mean, again, not only us, the Joint Research Center was here very important, and European Commission and so on, started to look into how we could make use of Sentinel data to make this process more efficient. And this is now called Area Monitoring System. I mean, this is it came into law this year in European law. So this is, I mean, that's also now what we do, like quite a bit. I mean, in terms of revenue, just if from out of interest, like we generate, I think last year about 12 million euro or so. And I would say that about
So 12 million for Sinergise as a whole.
Sinergise as a whole, indeed. And out of this, about 30% is Sentinel Hub subscriptions, like really standalone subscriptions. About 20% are, we call this white label deployments. And then the rest are the projects related to agriculture and a bit to land administration that now, yeah, very much involve satellite imagery as well, because it became clear that this is super useful. I mean, again, even in the real estate, we made a project in Azerbaijan when we helped them identify new buildings using satellite data. So now we do, we still do lots of it, but Sentinel Hub is far from the side project now. It's basically pushing all the other fields further.
But it's still a third of the revenue, from what you said.
Just subscriptions. I mean, like general. But then we had and we still have projects like Diasis, so these data information access services, or Copernicus Data Space Ecosystem, as it is called now. These bring significant revenues, and these would amount to about 20 to 30% of additional ones. So basically, you have more than half of the revenue is based on the Sentinel Hub technology.
Okay. Can we break that down a little bit? So I want to get back to Sentinel Hub itself. So there's subscription. So that is people who go on the website and are like, okay, I want an easy way to access Sentinel imagery. Here's my credit card, and I can do a little bit like Google Earth Engine or a lot of these other platforms that spun up today, but specifically to access a lot of Sentinel imagery. And that's kind of targeted to, like, it's priced as a customer thing a little bit, like it's a few tens of euros per month, if I understood correctly.
Some corrections. It started with Sentinel, but then it evolved further. So we also integrated Landsat data, which is obviously a very powerful resource. Integrated some other open data sets, and then we started to integrate commercial data as well, including and starting with Planet, but also Airbus and Maxar data.
Right.
That said, vast majority of our revenues at the moment is based on open data, which provides a lot of value to the customers. So yeah, our business model is priced about like how you mentioned. What is important though is that we started Sentinel Hub by thinking, look, this is the easy way for people to get the data in their, QGIS, ArcGIS, and alike. And so mostly to visualize it. And this is how we set up the pricing model. This is what is, let's say, a couple of tens of euros a month. However, what became clear soon is that if you really want to make use of this data, or extract value, it's not, there are very few people who are interested in looking at it. You want to do some further steps on it. So vast majority of our users, paying users, are actually application developers who built their own precision farming applications, mapping applications. I can mention Secure Watch from Maxar as an example. They use Sentinel Hub data as well. And there are plenty, hundreds, more than, well, actually it's 1,200, I think 1,200 like paying customers. And so they integrate this data in their own applications, and therefore they consume much more than what is for individual user. Where it gets even more interesting is when the data scientists started to tap into the Sentinel Hub, because they realized that they can, by connecting to our stream of data, they can basically, speed up their development, sometimes make it more cost efficient, sometimes just speed it up or reduce the effort. And the point, and simply, when you start using this in the data science, you start suddenly using orders of magnitude more data. So we have customers who are paying a couple of, basically 30 euros a month is the minimum package that we offer. But then we have customers who pay tens of thousands of euros a month, right? So it's a really widespread of the use.
So the value that Sentinel Hub brings is an API, basically. It's allowing easy access to that data, which is a whole conversation about open data in and of itself. Like people don't buy the data because that data is free and open by this Copernicus program, which is funded by the EU. I don't know which branch of the EU, so let's just say it's the EU. But what they pay you for is kind of the indexing and someone who knows where to go to get it, and that's easily consumable by applications down the line.
Yeah, I mean, in short, you're right. So they pay us for processing, and this is what we charge, right? We even form this term called processing unit, and I mean, depending how much you pay, how many processing units you get. And so we made a, let's say, payable business model on top of the open data, which is difficult, as you mentioned, because this is free data. But there are people who are willing to pay for more efficient access to the data. Because again, even if you use the data by yourself, you still need to do this compute and processing. So you need to pay for, I don't know, to some cloud provider or to some server. So there are always costs attached to it. So there is no such thing as a free data, right? It's taxpayers' money. In this case, European Union taxpayer money, which generates the data, distributes them. And then, we make them available in a more efficient way. And to put another complexity into the loop. Now with the Copernicus data space ecosystem, this new initiative by the European Union and European Space Agency, they decided to actually put some of the data, or they call it streamlined data access services, on top of it and offer this free of charge. And we are part of that initiative. So you can now, and from few days ago, I think literally 2 days ago, you can go to Copernicus Data Space Ecosystem and create an account and use Sentinel Hub services there, available free of charge. Again, paid by the European Union taxpayer money, and make use of them. Again, there are some thresholds because you need to kind of ensure the fair use. But so yeah, this is, it became clear to everyone that just data by itself has lesser value than if you combine it with some additional services on top of it.
That leads me to the next point. I want to talk about marketplaces. Or I don't know whatever term we want to associate, but what I mean by that is a platform or your website, whatever you want to call it, one single centralized place where you can access multiple different types of data. Every single time I describe Earth observation, satellite imagery to someone, and I tell them, okay, there's all these different images that you can buy, and they're like, what's the one place I can go to get that? It seems like when a lot of people come into this industry, that's the first thing they want to do is like, oh, let's build this one place. Let's build this Google search engine for not the internet, but for data. And when I was at my first job, my boss did a presentation and he said, don't build a marketplace. It was like, it's really, really hard because you have to get the people who have the data to agree that they're going to sell it through you. From their point of view, if you have to have a lot more distribution for it to make sense to have a middleman, because if you're a marketplace, you're going to be a middleman. You're going to take a cut. So you have to create a lot more reach for them than they could do on their own. And then you have to do that for every single place. So building a marketplace sounds good, but it was really hard. That got ingrained in me. And yet Sentinel Hub is one of those marketplaces. And so I'd love to hear, first of all, what do you think about that? And kind of what does it take to build one on your experience?
I could not agree more with what your friend or whomever advised you. It's really true. However, there was this important change, which I think actually kickstarted the whole Earth observation revolution, called Copernicus data. Because suddenly you had the data that was available under very clear open license, free of charge, and with some long-term sustainability in place so that we could start building business on top of it. And point being that Copernicus data is bringing so much value to many people that many don't come to the commercial data at all, right? They don't need it because you can make use of it. And we built our business on top of the open data. I mean, we added Landsat later and so on, and Moody's. And this made it possible. We did start bringing the commercial providers in, and there we face all these challenges that you mentioned, and it's difficult, and they change their business models along the way. And when you start small, because you obviously have no users who are willing to pay, and they are interested in, I don't know, can you commit to 7-figure annual budgets, right? Which again, us as a bootstrap company, we could not do that. So that's, so we built it on open data. Another thing that I think is important, we never perceived ourselves as a marketplace, even as a platform, right? We perceived ourselves as an API. We perceived ourselves as a AWS of the Earth observation. So a set of there was a guy asking me for to buy some food. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Anyway, AWS of the Earth observation, where we use the technology that is not inaccessible to others, right? You have lots of open source tool that is available to do that, but we use it in a much more efficient way, and we put a lot of effort to improve it, to make this data easier accessible to be integrated in other applications. So this is super important. Our business model is not come and download the data, but rather build your application on top of it. So similarly, as you can always go and build your own server stack and create your own cloud, right? You can do that. But people go to, AWS, Azure, Google, and alike, because they find value in that. And so we also have seen the Sentinel Hub as, look, this is one layer on top of the cloud, which makes, well, basically how we see it is that we provide access to the analysis-ready data. We make all the effort of getting the data from the raw into what is analysis-ready. And here, important that not every user has the same demands for analysis-ready data, right? Because they are building different kind of applications, different kind of analysis. Some need raw data, some need time series, some need images. So there are many things. And Sentinel Hub basically is a layer that provides this in a easy, fast way. And it's so cost efficient. I mean, it costs, I don't know, 50 euro per 1 million square kilometer of Sentinel-2 processed, right? It's literally nothing. And so people find value in that.
Right. And so then you can build this place where people come, and you can start attracting the bigger players that have the paid data, because you become one of the places where people come for the free data. And so now you have already customers, basically, I would say. And so now it makes it a lot easier, rather than committing to those big orders that the Airbuses and Planets of the world ask for.
It basically evolves quite naturally, because when we did have this offering with Sentinel, people were using it, but then often they came to us and said, look, can you give us something better, like better resolution or better revision time and so on. And the first answer was, no, sorry, this is what we have, right? But then as we got lots of these questions, we started thinking on bringing the commercial providers on top of it. And then, and because we had this demand already, at least expressed, we were able to go to them. Again, a very important player in this was the European Space Agency, which helped us to facilitate these conversations in a much more efficient way. I mean, when they put their weight behind it, they listen, like the commercial providers, they listen. So they helped us a ton. And we were able to persuade them to integrate. We did all the work. They just needed to provide access to their APIs. And then we started to generate some revenues on top of it, commercial data as well.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. I can imagine that having the support of the EU Commission helps a lot.
European Space Agency in this case, which is again a very important player.
There's so many European organizations. I often get confused.
Not that many in this field, but these two are very important. Copernicus and the European Space Agency.
I want to move on. I want to talk about the EO browser. mostly because I think it's such a cool product. It's the thing that I point to a lot of people who know nothing about this field. When I want to show family what the heck I do, I still struggle with that a lot to try to explain. I can point to Google Maps, but that creates this false understanding that satellite images is super high resolution. And then EO Browser is great because I can take an image, show this is what your house was like a week ago. Sure, it's like 5 pixels, but it's still really cool to be able to show that time series in a way Google Maps just can't. To explain how the value of Earth observation, it's amazing. I see it everywhere when there's news, people use it. The one thing I don't understand is how does it make sense? Like why build something like this from a commercial point of view? Because you can access so much value for free.
I will have to again mention European Space Agency.
Okay.
Because it was their idea, really. I mean, we had this Sentinel Playground, which was there really to demonstrate the functionality. That was the core objective of Sentinel Playground. But then European Space Agency came and said, wow, this looks cool. But you know what would be even cooler if, in addition to Sentinel-2, you bring all these additional Sentinels on board as well, and the Landsat, and maybe later commercial data, and that you provide these additional functionalities which basically incentivize user to explore further, not just look at the latest data, but rather to go into the multi-temporal, multi-spectral stack of the Earth observation data, which is where I think there is a ton of value. They said that would be cool, and they put some budget behind that, right? Not a large one, but sufficient for us. And because they were European Space Agency, you don't say no to them, right? Because they typically have good ideas. They said, build that, and we started to build on that, and it took us about a year. And because it was a European Space Agency funded project, obviously there was no we couldn't we couldn't ask user to pay for the access, right? Because it was publicly funded. And then this is how it started. Then what we realized is that first of all, the most of the value of Earth observation data is not in looking at it, but rather in extracting information out of it and building, like making it, tailor it to some specific use cases. So just looking at the data, there is some value, but not a ton. So therefore, if we start charging to because the funding of the European Space Agency ended eventually, right? It was like 2-year project. And if we started to charge, we believe that not many will be really willing to pay for that. Then another thing is that we noticed that many of the users basically started with EO Browser without knowing anything about Earth observation. And then they got the ideas of what they could build with it. And then they basically became our paying customer because they started to build on it. So we realized that this is a good raising awareness tool. Because our in terms of Sentinel Hub, the major limitation for us was never competition, because there were very few competitors who had these services. Rather, it was a lack of demand because people simply didn't know what this data can be useful for. And now, if you have something like EO Browser, which at the moment has, I think, 200,000 visitors a month, which is a ton, right? I mean, a few years ago, when we entered into this field, we were told, I don't know where this is originating from, but there are a couple of thousands of people in the world who are, let's say, skilled enough to make use of the Earth observation data. And now with EO Browser, we get every month 200,000 who are, like, most of them for the first time looking into that. And they start seeing the value, seeing the limitations as well, right? This is important so that they don't have these cute expectations like you mentioned compared to the Google Maps. And then last but not least, one thing that EO Browser did very well was to demonstrate that our software really works. Because if you want to be an AWS of the Earth observation, if you want to power other applications, they need to believe that this will work, right? That this will actually be able to sustain their use. And by having the EO Browser there, they've seen, look, if this works for so many users, probably it can also work for our application built on top of Sentinel Hub. And this, I think that is a super important thing, because we charge a couple of tens, couple of hundreds, couple of thousands of euros a month for Sentinel Hub. But for someone to build application on top of it, they will have to invest, I don't know, man months of data or man months of effort or man years of effort, like way more than that, and to integrate it properly. And they don't do that if they don't believe that this will really solve their problem. And EO Browser really helped that. So it's kind of a combination of these three factors that helped to kind of make a decision to leave it. I mean, it's free of charge for non-commercial use. That's importantly. And we do have some customers who basically only who are our subscribers simply so that they can use EO Browser for commercial use. It's a license thing. We don't have any technical limitation. So it does bring some revenue, but it's insignificant compared to everything else.
That is so interesting. So the way, if I hear that, I think like, oh, this is a marketing tool, basically. It started as ESA says, oh, you guys should build this as a fixed project. And then once that ended, you realize that brings in actually, it grows the pie, basically, of the number of people. And so, yeah, 200,000 visitors a month. I'm guessing the costs behind that to keep it running are not insignificant, but it's worth it because it keeps growing the pie and it funnels people into Sentinel Hub subscription down the line.
You are right. I mean, that said, we still are a small company, right? So we don't have multi-million budgets. And I mean, it is, it's significant, but it's not something that we could not afford, right? I would not go into the numbers because this is where it gets confidential, but it's feasible for us. And by the way, it's not just, I mean, here, lots of the cost actually go to the map tiler as an example, who provides the tiles for the EO browser, and to Google, who powers the geocoding and so on. So lots of these services that are not ours basically consume some cost as well. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they are costs. They are not huge, but they are, I mean, it's perfectly, no question that they are worthwhile. One thing to mention is that the European Commission realized how much value there is in the EO browser, like simply to grow this pie. And when they decided to go into this Copernicus Data Space Ecosystem initiative, they basically said, we need something that does, I mean, they didn't mention EO browser, but like that does interactive visualization, full scale, full archive. So, and I mean, we were lucky enough that we were basically that we are part of the winning project. So now you have Copernicus browser living within the Copernicus Data Space Ecosystem, which is doing as the EO browser, but a bit more. And now it's also European Union, which is funding part of the operation of this tool. So for the part of the ecosystem.
I get very excited whenever on social media I see journalists who use images of like, oh, this thing happened, and there's a little like Sentinel Hub logo at the bottom. What are some of those users like? Do you have any feedback on like what people use it for out of those 200,000 users a month, or some of their favorite use cases or stories that you come across over the years?
I mean, we don't systematically collect feedback. We are still, by the way, we have a very small marketing department. Like there is one lady, and now recently we joined with another person. And so we don't do any of these systematic things that we should have, but we just don't. So all the evidence that we have is just anecdotal when we see things on Twitter like you did. Like one of well, there are two cool stories that I really like. One is when I've seen I've seen a BBC article mentioning the scientific paper which used EO browser to track penguins in Antarctica. I mean, penguins are way too small for to be detected with Sentinel data, but what you can efficiently detect is their poo, right? So this is where the story gets really fun. And they were able to find new colonies of penguins using the EO browser tool. Then another one which blew my mind was a story of a guy. So there was a guy lost in U.S. National Park, and he sent a photo of his surroundings. The photo was not geotagged for whatever reason, right? I mean, in today's mobile way, I have no idea why this was so. And he sent it to the friend and said, "Look, I'm lost. Can you find help?" And then the sheriff's department found. They put it on a Twitter, kind of. Does anyone know where this is? And then there was an enthusiast in California who used EO Browser and Google Earth. I think these two tools in combination to basically pinpoint the location of that lost hiker to, I think, like half a mile or something. Something that was unfathomable before. And with the images extracted from these two tools, he was also able to persuade Sheriff that he really knows what he's talking about, right? That's not a trivial thing. So, to the level that they sent a helicopter there and they were able to save this guy's life. So that's, to me, is like, oh, wow. That's crazy. So yeah, you have a ton of these kind of stories happening, and they make your life like really fun, right? Because you see that you are actually making an impact from a small company here from a small Slovenia.
I actually remember seeing that story unfold on the Lost Hiker. That one of the thing I actually am surprised is that you said there's only one marketing person. One of the other things I think about when I think about Sentinel Hub is not just the product, but there's like an entire community behind it. You guys host competitions, if I remember correctly. A few years ago, when I was starting to look into all of this, I also fiddled with some of the open source Python libraries that are out there. So there's the Sentinel Hub. I think there's EO Learn, if I remember correctly, which is like some machine learning things on top. Sinergise and like Sentinel Hub has a lot of creating tools and things for the community as well. Can you talk a little bit about why you do all of this? Like, because it takes probably a lot of time.
It does, but most of these things are built for our own use, right? It was just a decision that we made, is that if we build something that is useful for the community, and it's not a rocket science, something that we could, patent in whatever form. In Europe, you cannot patent software anyway. We believe it falls under the EO browser agendas. It's more valuable for us to share this openly because it creates the community. It builds trust of the users. And so basically, by giving away these things, we get new users who use EOLearn, and then in EOLearn you have Sentinel Hub integrated. Not just Sentinel Hub, but Sentinel Hub is really conveniently integrated, and people build their machine learning workflows on top of Sentinel Hub, and then they become our subscribers. So, and we got like quite a few large users from that because first of all, they value our contributions to the community. And then they find this useful, and because it's all available there, they can give it a start without investing something. And you would be surprised, even in large corporations, like a billion-dollar corporations, they still are not willing to just pay 10,000 euros to try something. So there is always some guy who would invest a few hours of their work to see whether something works. And for that, having all these free tools available, it's really valuable. And we don't have marketing. We always put our effort into building, raising awareness by just allowing other people to do it. So people can share images on Twitter. We have this contest where people can build the custom scripts, which we then host in the open source way on a GitHub, right? So that, again, they help the whole community, not just Sentinel Hub. And basically having a website where people come and subscribe. So this is the only marketing tool that we have, is our website and EO browser, and the newsletter. We have a newsletter. That's an important point. And so we were able to build this. We have, I think, 350,000 registered users, right? A vast majority of these are free and trials and so on. But again, something was difficult to expect for the Earth observation business, because again, it's such a small niche.
Right. Yeah, I love this. This is really cool. I directly, I want to say thanks as well. Like I directly used a lot of these things at first to get started. I'm a big fan of the just permissionless stuff where you can try things out without having to ask someone for permission or access to something. Like, just let me play around with it and I'll figure out if there's something here or not. I think that's incredibly valuable, and I'm very thankful for those things out there.
Thanks.
I want to talk a little bit about the money and the finance and things like that. You mentioned a couple times that the company started being bootstrapped. So, pending the whole planet thing, is that being the case as well, or has there been investment taken in? If you can talk about that, and then I'd be curious as to what was the rationale behind that. I really like understanding how people make money, where they take it, and what are the incentives. So we've talked a lot about how the money comes in, the services that you provide, and I'm curious as to how things have started.
So we were bootstrapped. We never took any investments, excluding the Horizon grants and the European Space Agency R&D projects, which again are as good or better than the investments.
Because you keep the equity, you mentioned
because
that.
you keep the equity, and
right.
because there's very clear rules are around it, right? So they don't expect you to build something for them or like long term and work with them long term and so on. So it's like very much on you. So we are profitable from day one. Literally, from even the Cozy Lab was profitable from day one because they had projects. And then when we spun off from Cozy Lab, we were profitable because we had projects there. And we are, so we are profitable. And it's a public record here in Slovenia. And like last year, I think there was 20 or 30% of our revenue in terms of the profit. So it's significant. But yeah, initially our profit was simply based on the added value that we created by basically selling our technology and our work, right? So we charge people per hours and for projects and so on. With Sentinel Hub, it was the first time that we were able to sell something that is just there, right? So you don't need a proactive effort for each and every customer that comes. It's there, and so we always basically relied on this. Now, what is important is that it also limited that, right? Because we didn't want to take these large bets. I don't know. Let's build a 100 million euro marketing campaign, whatever, right? We never. That simply is not in our mind. We are careful with how we spend our money, which is why probably we are smaller than what we could have been if we were more. We would have more courage in this respect. So all the, let's say, similar services that are out there, they are venture backed, and they did put a lot of budget into all kind of activities. So it might be, probably it would be smart that we would have done something like that as well. We could probably easily take an investment. We had, for a long time, we were getting requests by the investors who want to invest in Sinergise. But like when they only came with money, we were kind of, okay, yeah, money, but we need also help how to manage this, like how to build a marketing or sales team. That was not in our blood, right? So then we always rejected it. We said it's easiest, we just grow organically on. That's the safest option. But yeah, safe can only get you that far, right? So we this is where we then come to the story with Planet.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. Can you tell me a little bit about like what you feel comfortable sharing, of course, but you mentioned at the very beginning talking a bit about the rationale. I'm guessing that leads on to it. So if we can follow on over there.
So we worked with them for quite a while because they were the first data providers which were willing to resell data through Sentinel Hub. So we get to know them, and we get to know them intimately from the technical point of view because we were using their services in good and bad, right? You have all of it. One thing that we learned is that their product is really there. So it's like users come and they expect to have some data over their location, and you can find PlanetScope data. That was not an obvious thing for most of the satellite providers because they all rely on tasking. And tasking, first of all, it's expensive, and you can only get tasking for the future, right? You cannot task data for yesterday. They had and still have a unique product, which we found very valuable. We also got to know them like from the person perspective, and we realized that they are they have a very similar culture than we have even though they are US and we are Europe. But in terms of what we want to do, I mean, again, from the people perspective, they were very much alike. What they did have though is they had scale, and that's something that we don't have, right? They have scale of, as you mentioned, they have lots of data, they have lots of large customers, they have like a well-built sales engine where they so that they can really go and speak with customers that we were not able to address ourselves. And so we basically started to discuss, I mean, could we cooperate? Um, and we realized that, you know, you only have this much of time on the world, and you want to make best use of it. And we have technology that is really, really good, but we still are only, I believe, able to make a minimal impact because of our scale. And joining with Planet, it basically allows us that we increase this scale by orders of magnitude. So to give this data in the hands of way more people. And I mean, here I'm not talking only about revenues, because money was never our main objective, right? I mean, again, we were profitable, we make a decent decent living, but that was never our intention. We really just wanted to make something that's used. And I mean, now in the last few years, what is a thing that is like always mentioned, the climate change, and we realize that Earth observation data can really be used in a climate change, at least to try to change habits of the people. But you can only do this if you have an impact, right? Like a small company, you have very, very limited reach. And we basically realized that we can do this with Planet much better than by ourselves. And we decided, yeah, let's jump into it. Let's let's give it a try. We are super excited about it because it's something that we have not done, and we believe that so much good can come out of it. And yeah, it remains to be seen how well it will work, because all these kind of mergers have like risks. But yeah, I'm quite enthusiastic about what the future can bring.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. There's a lot of questions around that, and I understand we can't necessarily go there, so we'll leave that for a future conversation once all of this happens and gets settled. But yeah, I'm glad that we can talk about kind of the history of Sinergise and what you have done so far. I think this is a nice place to start wrapping it up, mostly because we could talk about the future, but it's so uncertain at the moment that it's probably not worth going there. So I am going to ask I like finishing these conversations with the same question every time as well. I like asking for a book and a podcast recommendation, mostly because they're a bit hard to come across, and they tell you about people, kind of what they're interested in. So I'd be curious to know, like, if there's a book or a podcast that you might have read, listened to recently that you think could be worth sharing, people check out. Doesn't really have to be about anything that we talked about, but just something interesting, maybe that people haven't heard about.
I mean, I was not prepared for this question, by the way. I guess I should have prepared better. I don't listen too much to the podcast. Actually, I only listen to the audiobooks when I'm running. Typically, when I'm running on a treadmill, that's the most boring thing one can do. Then I need an audiobook. So there was the audiobook that really made an impact to me was I think it's called how is it? Player One.
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One. Yeah, that one. Which, I mean, is so. By the way, it talks about the what is it, metasphere, right? I mean, something that I feel that Meta is trying to build now with their artificial with the augmented reality and so on. And to me, I mean, listening to that book kind of gave me, oh shit, if we are going into that, that's not a world that I want to live in, right? Because it's all the bad things that one can expect. And I mean, it's so super realistic, right? And this was, I mean, it was written way before Meta. And then when I was listening to announcement by Meta, I was like, oh shit, I mean, are we really, really going there? And I mean, because it gives such a good insight into what the world will be if this comes true. That's on the terms of the audiobook. In terms of the book, I mean, it's not a new one, but one that I always go to is the Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy. I mean, to me, that's like, it's so simple, yet it has so much of wisdom in it, that I read it, I guess 50 times at least, right, from start to end, because yeah, to me that's it's a Bible. That's a Bible to me, right? I'm not a Catholic or whatever, so I read Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy, and I open it and I see, oh, that's a good quote, and I think about it.
Yeah, big two big science fiction.
They
I
are
haven't
indeed,
read or player one, but H2G2, yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is great.
for sure. I mean, I imagine that you read it. You should read that one, because it really, the Ready Player One, it really gives like a visual insight into the world we are going towards, which is not good, which hopefully will make you and all the others put more effort into ensuring that the world that we live in now, that is really, really beautiful, remains likewise, right? I mean, that's something that we need to put an effort in.
I think those are nice words to end it on. Grega, I know this turned out a bit differently than we originally planned, so I still appreciate you coming on, taking some time to talk to me, giving me some of your valuable time. This was really insightful. Learned a ton about Sinergise, and I guess good luck for the future.
Thank you, and I mean, I'm sure that it will bring lots of benefit to the community, to the Earth observation, and hopefully wider. And thank you for having me on. I mean, it was super interesting to chat, and I'm looking forward to repeat this in, I don't know, few months or in a year, when we see how things are evolving. It will be probably a completely different story, because if we want to, if we want to change something, we need to also change the way how we work. So therefore,
Yeah.
many things will change on the long time, but I believe it is for the better for everyone.
Yeah, I hope this can serve as a timestamp in the history of the companies, and we can
Indeed.
come back to see
Indeed.
how things evolve. Thank you so much for listening to this conversation. If you found it valuable, please consider supporting my work on Patreon. I want to keep the ad load as minimal as I can, and I want to do more of these conversations in person. I want to spend more time researching them and producing them as best as I can. If this sounds something you'd like to be a part of and contribute to, please consider going to Patreon and supporting this work there. That's the best way you can help me make more of these episodes. I'll have a link in the show notes explaining a little bit more about what I want to do for the future of the podcast, and I'd love to do so with your support. Either way, thank you so much for your time, for listening all the way here, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers.